My stepmother stood at the head of the conference table and told the estate attorney that I hadn't been part of this family for a long time. "She left," she said, smoothing her blazer like she was giving a presentation at work. "Years ago. There's really no meaningful relationship to speak of." My father didn't look at me. He was studying something on the table, a scratch, maybe, or a knot in the wood. Somewhere he could rest his eyes that wasn't my face. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and said nothing. That was a Tuesday in March, and outside the attorney's office windows, Cincinnati was doing what Cincinnati does in early spring. A gray sky that couldn't decide between rain and just being miserable, bare trees lining the street below, a few pigeons on the ledge looking more certain about their lives than anyone in that room. I had driven 4 hours to be there. I hadn't slept the night before. I was 31 years old, and my father had just let his wife tell a stranger that I didn't really count. Let me go back. My parents divorced when I was 7, not dramatically. No screaming, no throwing things, no one night where my dad didn't come home. It was the slow kind. The kind where you start noticing that your parents talk to each other the way cashiers talk to customers. Polite, efficient. Waiting for it to be over. My mother got me. My father got the house, the business, and eventually about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, a woman named Cheryl who had a laugh like a car that won't start and opinions about everything, especially me. I'm not going to pretend I was an easy kid to step-parent. I wasn't. I missed my mother when I was at my dad's place and I made sure everyone knew it. I cried at dinner. I refused to call Cheryl anything. I once told her that her meatloaf tasted like cardboard with ketchup on it, which, looking back, was rude but also accurate. But I was 7, then 8, then 10, and the feelings that Cheryl had about me calcified into something harder than frustration. I became, in her mind, a problem that my father had brought into her life, a remnant of a previous version of him she hadn't chosen. My dad went along with whatever kept the peace. That's the thing about my father I spent a long time trying to understand and an even longer time accepting. He's not a cruel man. He never hit me, never screamed at me, never said the things to my face that Cheryl sometimes said when he wasn't in the room. He just disappeared a little into whatever she needed him to be. He loved me the way some people love a houseplant. Genuinely, I think, but without a lot of active tending. By the time I was in high school, I was spending most of my time at my mom's, and my visits to Dad's house had shrunk to holidays and a few weeks in summer. Cheryl's kids, she had 2 from her first marriage, a son and a daughter, both older than me, were always there, always comfortable in a way I never quite managed to feel in that house. I graduated high school, got a full scholarship to Ohio State for nursing, worked through my undergrad, graduated, sat for my boards, got my RN, spent 2 years in a hospital ICU learning what real pressure looked like. Then went back to school, a master's program in nursing, with a focus on pediatric acute care. I was 28 when I became a nurse practitioner. By 30, I was clinical coordinator at a children's hospital in Columbus, managing a team of 12 and consulting on cases that came through from 3 counties. I didn't do any of it for my father, but somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I didn't look at too closely, I think I hoped he would notice. He came to my nursing school pinning ceremony. That was something. He shook my hand after, the way you shake hands with someone you've just met at a work event, and said, "Good job, kiddo." And then Cheryl made a comment about the parking situation, and they left. My mother was the one who cried. She was the one who framed my license and hung it in her hallway. She was the one who called me every Sunday, who flew down when I got promoted, who kept a picture of me and my hospital badge on her refrigerator until the day she got sick. She was diagnosed in October. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. She told me over the phone, very matter-of-fact, because she was that kind of person. She never wanted to make you feel like you had to perform sadness for her. She said she had a good oncologist and a plan, and she was not going to spend whatever time she had being tragic about it. She lasted 14 months. I was there for all of it. I took intermittent FMLA, rearranged my schedule, drove to Dayton every weekend I could. I knew enough about medicine to understand the arc of what was happening, and that knowledge sat in my chest like a stone the whole time, heavy and cold, telling me things I didn't want to know. My father called twice during those 14 months. Once when she was first diagnosed, a 5-minute call where he said he was sorry to hear it and hoped she'd be comfortable. Once, about 3 months before she died, to ask me if I knew whether she had updated her will. Not whether I was okay, not whether I needed anything, whether her will was current. I told him I didn't know. We hung up. My mother died on a Thursday morning in February, with me sitting on the edge of her bed holding her hand and a nurse I had worked with years ago standing quietly in the corner. Hospice had come. She wasn't in pain. She slipped out like a tide going out, gradually and then all at once, and then the room was just a room. She left me everything. Her savings. Not a fortune, but real money, enough to matter. Her house in Dayton, which she had paid off. Her car. Her jewelry. A letter she had written me that I will never share with anyone, not because it's a secret, but because some things belong only to the person they were meant for. She also left me something I hadn't known about. When I was 3 years old, my maternal grandmother had set up a trust. My grandmother was a practical woman who had grown up without much and spent her adult life making sure that would never happen to anyone she loved. The trust was modest by some people's standards, about $180,000, set to distribute to me when I turned 35, or earlier if certain conditions were met. My mother had been the trustee. She had updated the documentation twice over the years, added language, kept everything clean and in order. When she died, the trust didn't go through her estate. It had its own structure. I was the beneficiary. The successor trustee was a professional trust company she had designated years ago. I found out about this 2 weeks after her funeral, when the trust company contacted me. I also found out that my father had contacted them first. I'm still not entirely sure how he knew. I think my mother must have mentioned it to him at some point years ago, back when they were still civil with each other about logistics. Or maybe Cheryl had done some digging. Either way, within 10 days of my mother's death, my father had hired an attorney and submitted a claim challenging my status as the rightful beneficiary. His argument, and I'm still barely able to type this without laughing, was that the trust documents referenced Eleanor Voss's daughter at certain points, and that since I had legally changed my last name from my father's name back to my mother's maiden name when I was 25, there was an ambiguity about my identity that needed to be resolved. My name change had been simple and entirely legal. I had done it after a particularly bad Thanksgiving at my dad's house, where Cheryl referred to my mother, in front of me, and my father laughed. I drove home that night, filed the paperwork the following week, and never looked back. Now that paperwork was apparently a problem. The trust company, following their protocols, filed to have the matter reviewed, which is how I found myself sitting in a conference room at an estate attorney's office on a Tuesday in March, across the table from my father and his wife and their attorney, waiting for someone to explain to me why I needed to prove I existed. Cheryl did the talking. My father studied the table. Their attorney, a man named Gresham, heavyset, who kept clicking his pen, laid out their position with the smooth, effectless delivery of someone who has said unpleasant things on behalf of other people for so long that he's stopped registering what those things mean. I was, apparently, a complicating factor. My relationship with the family had been estranged for years, Gresham said. The name change created a documentation issue. My mother's intentions were unclear. These things happened, he said, in an estate context. It was important to make sure everything was properly resolved. The trust company's attorney, a woman named Doctor, she had a law degree and a doctorate, which she did not mention but which was on her business card. Let Gresham finish. Then she placed a folder on the table with the quiet precision of someone who has done this many times and does not need to perform authority to have it. Mr. Gresham, she said, your clients are challenging the beneficiary designation of a trust that was established in 1995, updated in 2004 and again in 2017. And which has never at any point named anyone other than the petitioner as its sole beneficiary. We're not challenging the trust itself, Gresham said. We're challenging the identity of the petitioner. The petitioner was born Margaret Lynn Voss, daughter of Eleanor Voss, née Hartwell and Robert Hale. Her birth certificate, her Social Security records, the name change documentation filed in Franklin County in 2009, and the trust company's own Know Your Customer verification all confirm the same identity. The name change is documented, legal, and entirely irrelevant to her status as beneficiary. Gresham clicked his pen. There's still the question of estrangement. The family's position is that a trust beneficiary is not required to maintain a relationship with anyone to receive a distribution. She said it the way you say 2 + 2 = 4. Patient, certain. The trust was created by Margaret's maternal grandmother for Margaret's benefit. Her mother maintained it for 26 years. There is no condition in this document that ties distribution to family contact or approval. My father made a small sound. I looked at him. He was still looking at the table. Gresham started to say something else, And then the attorney from the trust company did something I hadn't expected. She looked at him steadily for a moment, then said, "Mr. Gresham, your clients engaged this proceeding. I'd like to ask them a direct question." "Mr. Hale," she said, "is it your position that you do not know who this woman is?" Silence. He glanced up from the table. He looked at her, then at me, then somewhere past my shoulder. "She's my daughter," he said. His voice was quiet. "Yes," she said, "she is. Her name is Margaret Voss. She is the daughter of Eleanor Voss, and she is the sole beneficiary of the Hartwell Family Trust as established in 1995. Is there anything else your clients would like to clarify before we proceed?" Gresham clicked his pen one more time and then set it down. Cheryl's expression had been moving through something for the last 30 seconds. Not quite shame, maybe, but some cousin of it. The look of a person who has pushed something as far as it will go and has just discovered where that is. My father looked like he had gotten smaller. Not physically. He was still the same man, same broad shoulders, same gray at the temples that had been creeping in since his 50s. But something in the set of him had changed. He looked like a man who had just heard himself out loud and didn't particularly like what he heard. The proceeding concluded 20 minutes later. The claim was withdrawn. The trust company attorney shook my hand and told me I'd be hearing from them soon about the distribution timeline. I walked out into the Cincinnati afternoon. Still gray, still damp, still undecided about itself. I sat in my car for a few minutes and didn't really do anything. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't devastated. I was tired in the particular way you get tired after holding something carefully for a very long time. I called my best friend. I didn't even know what I was going to say, but she answered on the second ring and said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "It went," and she said, "Come over." And somehow that was exactly right. What I've thought about most in the months since isn't the money. The money is helpful. It's sitting in an account, and it feels like something my grandmother meant for me to have, and I try to think about it that way. What I think about is my father's voice in that room, saying, "She's my daughter," almost too quietly to hear. He said it because he had to, because there was no other answer that worked. I know that. I'm not building any story around it where it becomes more than what it was. But there was a moment, just a second, right after he said it, where I caught his eyes. And I saw something there that wasn't legal, strategy, or whatever position Gresham had coached him to take. It was older than that. It was the kind of look that lives underneath everything else, the one that doesn't know how to say what it means. I don't know what that means for us. I don't know if it means anything at all. What I know is this: my mother spent 26 years making sure I would be taken care of. She did it quietly, without telling me, without making it a thing. She just did it. That's who she was. She kept a picture of me on her refrigerator, and she set up a trust when I was 3, and she held my hand on a Thursday morning in February without complaint. And that was her answer to every question anyone could ever ask about whether I belonged somewhere. I am 31 years old. I am a nurse practitioner and a clinical coordinator and a daughter and apparently a sole beneficiary, and I have driven 4 hours in both directions for people who told a stranger I didn't count. I won't be doing that again. Some mornings I still sit with my coffee and think about that conference room. The gray light coming through the windows. My father looking at the table. Cheryl's face when she realized it was over. Gresham's pen finally still. And my mother's attorney setting a folder down with both hands, looking at a man who had hired lawyers to say his daughter wasn't his daughter, and asking him, simply in front of everyone, "Do you truly not know who she is?" He did. He always did. He just forgot for a while that it was supposed to matter.